Hey everyone, welcome to another 5-Minute Friday. Again, this is Matt Palmer. As you may have seen in our intro video, I came to you from my favorite fishing spot in Southern Oregon on the Rogue River. And similar to me sharing my secret fishing spot, I'm excited to continue to share the secrets of successful report building in higher education in Salesforce. This is part 2 of a multi-part series in building a report together. You may have recalled, or if you have not seen part 1, please go back and reference that on the PowerBus Hub or on our Rad Navigator site. That starts the foundations of building reports in the Lightning experience, specifically for higher education. As we continue to dive into this topic, today we're going to continue that conversation on the report that we had first built last week and continue to look at 2 report types, and that primarily is what's called a matrix report and a summary report, and how you can really start to leverage these 2 pieces or report types to really dive into your data and scale accordingly. So without further ado, let's jump in. Let's go ahead and go to the Reports tab, and here we can find the reports that we had referenced recently in our last training. You should, if you followed along in step 1 or video 1, see a similar report here that you can just go ahead and edit. If not, you can quickly create a new report to get to where we are in our next steps. I go ahead and click Applications with Applicant Report. Once I'm in this report type, I can go ahead and click the Edit button, which now brings us to a review in the topic of today, which is how we can start to summarize and group our data together. As we reviewed last week, this current report type is called a tabular report type, which is similar to something like an Excel spreadsheet. We have the applications with applicant. We see columns of information as we reviewed last week, but we have done nothing to start to group these pieces of information together. So let's go ahead and look at how we can do that. The first thing I want to do is go ahead and add the item I want to group by clicking onto columns. And I'm going to go ahead and just add the admission status based on the application. You can see that will now populate. And now I can also group by admission status. So if I go in here and I type in admission status again, this now has created what's called a grouping of the data. So if I were to just simply save and run this, currently as it's articulated, this is what's called a summary report. This is grouping based on one piece or the attributes of these different applications. And you can see in this preview, again, this is not the final result, an idea of how many we have kind of in each category. Related to inquiries, started app, admitted, etc. If I wanted to go ahead and save and run this, so click Save and Run, what you'll notice is once this happens, I can see the total number of records, and then I can see the grouping by total admission status. I could group that up and down. I could select and dive into this data more specifically. And we'll talk about charts here in a minute, but in order to have a chart, you need to be able to have at least one grouping of data. So let's continue to see how we can further group this data together. So if I go back to click Edit, let's go ahead and add another grouping that we can group by. So the first grouping that we have is based on admission status. Let's go ahead and add the column of program. So here we have the academic program. And some of these academic programs, depending on the status, might be blank in this test data. But let's go ahead and now group by academic program as well. So in other words, let's go ahead and see, based on program and admission status, how we can start to dive into our data. So I'm going to select academic program. Once I do this, you'll notice that it's creating an order in which things are grouped. So the first column here, or the first line here, admission status, is what it's grouped by first. And then within admission status, you can see, as an example, groups by program. So we have 4 inquiries in art and design. versus 1 in chemistry lab. Now, if I want to separate this out a little bit further and go ahead and switch academic program, academic status, so group by program first, what I'd be able to do is just drag and drop this. And now you'll notice that academic program is what's being grouped by first. So if you wanted to run a report that showed, let's say, the dean or the admissions director, kind of the current status of all programs and applications per program, you could easily group by something like this, where you can see we have a number of these grouped together. Now, if I were to save and run this, again, you would see both those substatuses. Now, if I wanted to sort this, I could click this up and down. If I click into here, you can see that I can further detail this. So I can make this a detail column. I can bucket this column where I'm starting to bucket fields together. I can sort by, I can sort descending, ascending, group columns by this field. So each one of these drop downs really give you some flexibility in how you can further segment your data. I'd recommend in your test report that you continue to dive into each one of these options. So as we continue to dive into this, let's go ahead and look at the difference between what's called a summary report, and we summarize based on 2 attributes, and a matrix report. The difference of a summary report is we are summarizing by these 2 attributes in the same grouping of rows. But a matrix report is similar to me to a pivot table, where now I can group by row and column to essentially create more of a grid. So if I drag admission status down, this is now going to give me a summary count where it's going to group by admission status and academic program. What I really like about this is it gives you a really clean, precise view in your totals. So I'm going to go ahead and save and run this, this matrix report type. And again, it makes it a matrix report because I group by a column and a row. I'm going to save and run. And what's great about this is if I really wanted to dive into some of this information, I can click into an intersection of the table to further filter in. So for example, art and design has quite a few records. So if I wanted to see who these 197 inquiries are, it gives me a filtered list right below. And again, these columns that we see here are based on what you put in the report. So you can kind of really get a quick segmentation of your data, and you clear this out. But click into this, very similar to how a pivot table would work in Excel. But this is a great report type. So that takes me to our next step here, which is now how can we, now that we've kind of grouped this information together, how can we visualize it, right? And the way that we can do that is by adding a chart. So if I wanted to add a chart, I could do a basic chart here by just clicking here. Or I could simply click edit and go back into the report. Once I'm back into the report, you'll notice an option up here that says chart properties. And this is where I can further dive into building visualizations on my data. Now for ease here, I'm going to go ahead and just make academic program admission status a summary report real quick, so we can kind of see how the chart would correspond to that. So once I drag this up here, I can now see my data displayed, and I can go to chart properties and I can title this chart, but this would be a good example where we have a program and an admission status of where I like to use a stacked bar or a stacked column. So if I go to stacked bar, what this is going to allow you to do is determine the record, academic program record type, the admission status, so what we're basically grouping by, and depending on what we have over here is how we can group this information together. You can choose to stack to 100% or not. You can show a reference line. These are just kind of general chart settings. in a legend position. But I'm going to go ahead and just save this as is. And the way I do that is once I make these changes, click off of here, and now I can save and run my report. Once I do that, what you'll notice here in this top portion is that I now have a stacked bar report, where, for example, I could hover over here and see by chemistry, for example, the totals I have for each, right? So it's 29 submitted apps, or for biology, we have 34. And over here to the right, you can see the color kind of correspondence to some of these different groupings. So the last thing just to note here is that in certain scenarios, if I want to, for example, you can see that some of these have a blank program. If I didn't want this as part of my report, just as a quick refresher, if I go back into edit and I want to edit out this attribute, I can go back into my filters and basically say that academic program is not equal to blank. So this means that all records that are going to be part of this report, at least is going to have a program. I can now save and run my results. And what you're going to see now is that we're not going to have that kind of blank top line. We're going to have every record that has an associated program will be part of this particular report. So next week, we're going to continue to take a deeper dive on how we can start to add summaries, deeper filters, and start to scale our reports up, especially with things like terms, use time attributes, and so forth. But hopefully this gets your foundations kind of set and being able to group your data together and start to visualize it in different ways. All right, so as we reviewed today, we reviewed how we can start to group our data together in report building. We reviewed how we can start to visualize that using different chart types, including a stacked bar chart, and reviewed matrix reports and summary type of reports. So again, we set our foundation with report building. We're continuing to build on that with different report types. Next week, stay tuned as we continue to take a deeper dive that we can start to apply some more advanced filters to this, leverage some things like formulas and reports, and start to give you some real tangible examples that you can use at your own school to start to group your data together. So with that, thanks again for joining me here. Stay tuned for our next 5 Minute Friday. Have a great weekend.